Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI Sana podcast. I am super excited to introduce you today to one of my friends that I have known for coming on to 15 years. Hui, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time today. Appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, I'm so lucky to have you. I know that we've been friends for a long time, and for as long as I've known you, you've in the software and tech heavy sales industry. But your background is so much more interesting than that. Give me a little bit and give us a little bit of a flavor of like who you are, how you ended up working in sales for high growth startup.
Yeah, no, yeah. So I took quite a bit of a journey here. And it wasn't always, clear and direct that I was going to be in sales. In fact, when I started my career, didn't think highly of salespeople, to be honest. I graduated with a genetics degree, and like everyone's always like, from genetics to software developer, how did you do that? Back then, and you had so much genomic code back then, and it was actually a requirement for you to learn to program to actually get your work done. There's just so much information back then. And, we had to develop new algorithms and how to fit all that in memory back then. And so, I after going into genetics, I realized I had to get a good master's or PhD, and I realized it wasn't for me. So I joined my first startup, oh my God, almost 25 years ago. And it was a small startup. And I started as alpha as a software developer. And when you're at a small startup, you actually wear a lot of hats. And so they called me in one day and asked me, hey, would you like to do an on-call? I was like, sure. I never done it. I'll try. And
What does an on-call mean?
yeah, so we had a product, and customers would call in for help during the weekends, for example, right? We didn't have a lot of support, a full-time support staff. All right. Once you sell the product, right, you have to have support for a customer in case they had issues. So customers would call in on the weekend, and then they would get whoever the company had available. And so I did support for a while, and I realized I liked it. I was writing developer software fixes for customers, and it was really neat to seeing the product that I was helping write and seeing how customers were frustrated with this, and then just seeing where the rubber met the road, right? And it was really neat because customers would give me feedback, and I would change it on the fly for them, and they loved me for that, right? And so I did support for a while, and I loved it, right? Every day is a different day, right? No 2 days alike. Customers always There's always going to be more problems to fix, okay? And so I did software development, and then after a while, I joined a company called Data Domain. And you guys probably don't know what Data Domain was, but you guys probably heard of a company called Snowflake today, and prior to that was a company called ServiceNow. So the CEO of those three companies, Data Domain, ServiceNow, and Snowflake, was a guy by the name of Frank Slootman. And Data Domain was actually his first IPO. So I joined that company, and we learned a lot through the ups and downs with Frank. And Frank was, to be honest, the best CEO I ever worked for. And so I tell everyone this: the most valuable experience of my life was seeing a startup, from a very small infancy to grow. Right? Everyone sees the big company, and everyone sees the small company. Everyone doesn't see that journey. That journey is what makes is the most rewarding journey in my career. And we've taken that to several other companies, just learning from Frank there. Frank had a very hard charging attitude. He wanted to win, right? And he wanted to win right. We
Mm.
don't do things half-assed. We solve the hard things. And I had a lot of stories with Frank, but we'll go back to that a little later. So I joined Data Domain. I managed there, and this is a time when we finally transitioned to enterprise. So
Mm.
from a small startup that just went IPO'd, and then we went to how do we get into these Fortune 500 companies, right? And the selling motion had to completely change, and the company had to pivot around that. You support your install base, your revenue today with your smaller commercial based customers, but eventually you want to get into these enterprise customers.
Mhm. We'll when we get to that part of this recording, I would like for you to kind of explain what does enterprise sales mean. But let's go back. So you were a geneticist, then you were a programmer, and then you started doing kind of the technical support side of sales. And at some point, you decided that you were just going to go right into actual sales, right? Technical sales.
Like,
So you joined Data Domain before they went to IPO. You saw them through the IPO, and then did you stay? Did you leave? Why did you leave? Did you end up following Frank to Snowflake?
well, at the time I didn't know Frank was such an amazing CEO, and I saw salespeople, after Data Domain, we got acquired by EMC afterwards and there was a bidding war between Network Appliance and EMC at the time. And I mean, this is back in 2006, I believe. And I think that was, it was a $2.4 billion acquisition at that point. Right? And you got to put things in perspective, right? Because VMware was purchased for about $600 million, and they were purchased by EMC as well. So there was a bidding war between those two companies. And the reason I left was simply because I was a startup guy. I was a little younger then. And curiosity always driven me, right? And I had a very let's get it done attitude. I wasn't afraid to learn new things to get the deal done, to be honest, right? Most salespeople can't talk about low level code, and then suddenly 1 minute I'm talking about your businesses, right? It was the curiosity to be better, to better myself too.
Yeah, yeah. And so, okay, so then after data domain, where did you go? What was your next start?
Yeah, I was still in support. I joined the start, and I would think I was support engineer number 2 at the time. And a lot of people think support is this, bunch of guys, just, they facilitate solving the problems. I was a developer too. So there we formed the infrastructure on how to, your first support engineers. How do we make, we didn't want to start a support organization where customer calls in and then you just go through solving the problems and then it's just one off, right? How do we saw this problem at data domain. Every 100 systems we sold, we had to hire one support engineer. And this is important because I'll tell you later why Nimble was eventually, we went IPO and we were eventually acquired by.
Wow. So Nimble is your second startup. So the second
Yeah,
startup,
Nimble was my second startup.
and that one you also saw pre-IPO through the IPO process to post-IPO. Okay.
Yep. And then, so we developed tools, right? And, a lot of people, at a startup, and I warn everyone this, the hardest thing at a startup is time management, right? Where are you going to be most effective and what is going to get you to your goal? And these are things I learned from Frank early on, right? You have to remember we're at war out there with everything. Frank was very aggressive, and I like that about Frank. But you have to remember at the end of the day, what is your goal? And there's going to be a lot of noise along the way, and you have to remember your goal.
So what was your goal at Nimble, and then what did you do after? Did you stay with Nimble? Did
I
you?
stayed with Nimble for exactly 4 years, your stock vesting. And I had another itch to join another startup.
Okay. Okay, Hui. So you've mentioned that you joined Data Domain. You saw that through an IPO. You joined Nimble. You saw that through an IPO. So then what happened after Nimble?
Well, I'll be honest, you have to understand why I left too. Um, it was a company that I helped build. And this is where I see a lot of people, a lot of companies post IPO start failing, where you lose focus, first of all.
Okay.
And you lose that hunger. I was working 60 hours a week, right? And to me, that was a light week.
Okay.
And I get it, right? Future employees, they're not going to have that drive because they're getting a little less equity, right? People come to a little larger company, they expect a little more work-life balance, and I get that too. But what happens, and I tell everyone this is the most important thing that I learned from Data Domain and seeing this firsthand at Nimble was alignment. The company was not aligned, and that's from marketing, that's from sales, that's from the whole company needs to be aligned and understand what we're selling. If an engineer can't tell you what we're selling, right, then I think we're in trouble here. And
Mm-hmm.
you see that with alignment. I'm very big on alignment now, seeing how that's like the number one issue is what causes a lot of companies to fail, even startups, right? Everyone needs to be aligned why we're doing things and why, and what's the outcome we're expecting. And we need to be behind that. That's one. Number two, when I talk about alignment, right, a lot of people, think that, hey, if I do marketing right, I do sales right. I do finance right. I have good product strategy, and then sales just comes together. That's not true. I think you have to have a very strong feedback loop to take that feedback back from sales back into wherever it goes, right? Yeah, and I'll give you a perfect example. Customers were complaining at Snowflake, for example, that the contracts were complicated. Frank came back and made sure that got in and to legal actually.
Mm.
And he made sure the contract was so easy to read.
Uh-huh.
Right? He was very good at taking sales feedback, and he made, to be honest, sales very easy.
So then it seems like you speak very highly of Frank. Re did your journey ever overlap with Frank again?
Yeah, we ran into him a few weeks ago, actually. It's funny you mentioned that. I was picking up dinner, and then I ran to Frank, and there's two billionaires sitting there in the corner and just having dinner at an average Italian restaurant. Frank and I caught up there, and we talked a lot about how Frank made the job easy, right? And at the same time, I worked for a guy named Matt Jacobs. Him and I were paired together. This whole journey, starting from Data Domain, I was very close to a guy named Matt Jacobs. Him and after Nimble, right, after two IPOs, Matt and I were cemented ourselves as the startup team.
Mm.
right? So starting in Silicon Valley, a lot of companies were actually recruiting us just to become the first sales team at that point. Matt's a little older than me, and the guy's gone through 4 IPOs,
Wow. Wow.
and he had a formula, right? And it was, first of all, he was the most amazing storyteller. Okay, and you knew this too. You know what? I think there's one thing I like to tell everyone. In the world of Zoom today, right? I think people have just gotten too much to Zoom. We got to get back in person in the field. There's nothing like a face to face,
Yeah.
right? You and I used to chat all the time, and what are you doing? I'm driving.
Yeah. Yeah.
I put in 5,000 miles a year every one of those companies, and people are all like, "Why?" I'm like, "Because my competitor's too lazy. First of all, right? I would drive 6 hours for one meeting.
Wow.
I went through Yeah, I always had two cars. I went through a car every 2 years, and people ask why. Because I'm in front of the customer, I can read their body language, I can read where they're engaged, and it's to be honest, it's a lot easier sell when you're in person.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to read the room, and I think we miss that connection, especially we default to Zoom too often.
Yep, yep. That's absolutely true. I want to. We're starting to pivot into the core meat of this content, and so I just want to make sure that we kind of summarize your experience for our students here. After Data Domain, you went to Nimble. After Nimble, you went to Datrium, and Datrium also IPO'd.
Datrium got acquired by VMware at the end. Actually, we didn't IPO.
Okay,
Um,
so you were number two sales at Nimble. You were early employee pre IPO at Data Domain. Were you also an early employee at
Datrium. I was the first SE.
so early into and part of the growing team at one, and you saw through acquisitions and IPOs. I think for our students here who are listening, they see success and they usually see it from the founder's perspective, and they don't think of entrepreneurship as one of those where you join a startup. And I would argue that you're very entrepreneurial. You were a part of the early sales team. You were a part of early development of the team strategy. I want to just ask you a couple of questions if we can jump into the meat of it. You mentioned earlier, you said sales, marketing, finance, and they say people think that if your finance and your marketing is good and your product is operational, that your sales happens. What's the difference between sales, marketing, and finance? Why did you distinguish those three things?
Well, I think financing is important, right? I mean, it drives everything, right? So, like, when salespeople are very coin operated, to be honest, too, right? And I think, the reason I bring finance is a lot of times finance can get in the way of sales.
But what does sales mean versus what does finance mean versus what is
Yeah.
marketing?
Sales is, the person that's, I always view it as this person that is the face of the face of the company to the customer, right? And we're here to be consultative and get them over the line to say, hey, I'm ready to buy your product because I believed in everything you said, right? Right. And I deal with financing a lot, and the reason I bring it up a lot because I think it does hamper sales a lot sometimes. Because when you're talking to a guy that just sees the books and he sees money in, money out, right? And then sometimes what they do, the finance people say, no, I want you to get better margin out of this.
So marketing is the branding and the storytelling. Sales is the storytelling at the point in which the storytelling converts into an actual agreement of some sort or
Yeah.
shape or form. And then finance is the post agreement, the
It's sort of the glue that ties everything together too,
pay.
right?
I see. And then, you've been at early startups, you've been at later stage startups. Can we talk about what is, when we talk about sales, people typically say you go out there and sell the thing you've built. But a lot of our students here, they're learning entrepreneurship, and I'm hoping that you can help them figure out, is there a room for sales before you have a product? Or
Right.
what does sales
Right.
mean before product
Yeah.
development?
So I'll give you an example. At Datrium, I actually came in sales team. We didn't have a product yet.
Mm. So
I spent
why would they hire a salesperson without a product? And why in the world would you as a salesperson join a company without a product?
well, we had a general idea
Okay.
of the product, right? But we didn't know what. And so to give you a little background, Datrium was actually the founders of Data Domain,
Mm.
and they actually had three of the first founding engineers from VMware.
Cool.
So we had a lot of star power. Diane Green was an early funder to Datrium. Frank Slootman also was angel.
And who for our students' sake, who is Diane?
Diane Green was the founder, the CEO of VMware. Her
Mm.
husband, Mendel Rosenblum, was the CTO of VMware. And so, we had a lot of star power there. People with tremendous success, track records there too.
Yeah.
And so, um, and so, we spent the first year and a half just interviewing customers.
Okay. Okay, wait, so you joined as the first salesperson pre-product, and they brought you in order to go interview customers?
Yeah, it was just
Why
interviewing
why
because
would
it was to validate what the founders suspected the market had.
Okay. And so this in kind of, if we kind of use startup jargon, this is kind of customer discovery and voice of the customer research.
Exactly. I would approach a customer prospect, because I had some MBOs. One was we're going to eventually exit out of alpha and beta, right? Before you launch the product. And we had to get some alpha customers.
And what is an for our students' sake, what is an alpha versus what is a beta customer?
So an alpha customer is someone that's willing to take a first revision of a code, your product. It's not exactly polished, and typically it's under NDA.
Okay.
Right? It's typically done under NDA. It's not exactly polished, and they work closely with you, to be honest, to help refine the product
Mm,
before it launches into what we call beta. Beta means the product is 90% polished there, and we know there's a market now. Okay, but we're getting all the bugs out.
I see.
Right, it's deployable, it's repeatable, right? And so alpha is like really early.
Yep. And so how do you go about doing the customer discovery before you even identify who your alpha customers are? How do you go about doing customer discovery?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Early customers, they tend to get excited over new technology, right? They're not in it too much about the business side of it. Like, well, how does it get my ROI, right? You have to find those customers that what I call the scientists. And we had a strategy that we went after a lot of universities and school districts, to be honest, right? Because they're willing to experiment new technology, get more value out of it, right? They see your potential, and of course, and I tell everyone this too. When your first set of customers, you have to find that scientist willing to work with you. That's the most important, right? Eventually, go back to your question about what's enterprise. Those are completely different conversations now. Those are business conversations. How this product, what's the ROI, right? That's what CTOs are at that level. But now you have a technical product, and it's a more technical sale early on.
And you have a technical person inside that customer who really wants whatever the technical product is that you've built.
Yeah, he gets excited. This is the guy that gets excited over like new technology. You know what I mean? And you
Yeah.
have to find those customers.
And so you said, you're kind of validating the thesis. What questions are you asking, and what data are you gathering and then what can the information you gather say to help you validate a thesis?
Yeah, so I worked for Brian Biles. He was the product manager for Data Domain, and so you really have to go interview a lot of customers, talk to them, ask them questions, open-ended questions.
Like what?
Tell me about your environment. That's the most open-ended question. Tell me about your virtualization environment. We knew we wanted to sell a virtualized environment, right? Tell me about it. How's your compute usage? Tell me about your day-to-day.
Mm-hmm.
When you interview, and I asked Brian, how do you know what questions to ask, right? He said you ask a lot of open-ended questions, and eventually you see a pattern. There's always a pattern, and I realized that's through hundreds and hundreds of customers.
Yeah. Our students, students have heard this before from Alberto Pellicini, who is teaching us about product development, and this is a common theme. Before you develop a product, you go out and you kind of do the problem identification and market research. And in this case, before you do sales, you go out and do problem identification and market research. And in this case, you're doing market research specific to the customer.
It gets more narrowed down.
Exactly, exactly. And you're asking still the same open-ended questions. What does your day-to-day workflow look like? What are the problems that you have? Why do you have those problems? So you're doing the exact same thing in pre-sales. Okay,
Yep.
I see. And so this is pre-products. How do you take that data and go back to the company and help? Who do you help take that feedback, and how do you take that feedback?
Yeah, and this is the power of being an early stage person.
Mhm.
I went straight to the engineer that wrote the code,
Ah,
and I put him in front of the customer, right? Obviously, I would, quarterback him.
yeah.
But then, like I'll give you an example. There was an engineer that, there's a lot of times when you know, I you work at a larger company, right? And you said, oh my God, there's a GUI bug, all right? People put that as a priority for example, lowest priority. And the reason they do that is because it's not critical, right, to the core product. And I get it. Perception is perception is truth, right? And when people, a GUI bug, right, and when you're not OCD about it, they see that as your first product. It concerns people. Like, oh my God, is this what's else under the surface, right?
And the user experience matters. And
100%.
exactly, and a GUI bug might be the difference between a good and a bad experience.
Yeah, bad sales too, right? People don't want to buy a buggy. Like let's say for example, you buy a BMW, and we can go back to this a little later. This is one of the most important metrics, right? I look at this metric as how many issues does the customer have from deployment in the first 90 days.
Yep.
You buy a Honda Accord, or let's say a Toyota, great car, right? If you have an issue within the first, like two issues within the first 60 days, you sort of like back of your mind, you're like, man, what else could go wrong?
Right. Right.
Right? It takes a while to earn that trust back, right? That's a metric everyone should pay attention to. And you have to make sure those issues get fixed, right? The first 60 days. And we all know that the first sale is the hardest, right? Repeat sales it gets easier, right? The sales effort's a lot lower.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? So that metric is something I watch out for. And a lot of it, you'd be surprised. It's like GUI bugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're relaying the information back to the developer. The developer develops a product. So then what happens when the product is ready for sale?
So what happens there? That's a great question. And this is where I think everyone needs to be aligned, including financing. This is where I bring up financing a lot. Customers have to like the model, how you're selling it. What's the financial model?
Okay. Like the pricing and the business model.
The pricing, do they like the subscription? How are you charging for this, right? Right, because that impacts your business projection models and hiring later too, right? And then marketing needs to be aligned. You're coming out of stealth. You're going to make a big marketing push. What's the messaging that you found out during beta that resonates, right? And you have this one opportunity, right, to be clear to the world. I've seen bad product launches where marketing was not aligned, and then customers like got that idea stuck on them, and then it's really hard to pivot later.
Yeah. Yep. Understood. Understood. So that like out of the gate, fresh out of the gate has to be highly concentrated, highly coordinated, highly aligned. You were the first sales hire pre product. You've been the first sales team hire post product. What happens, we hear this concept a lot of founder led sales versus like the first sales hire type of sales. What's the difference between founder led sales and the first hire versus nth hire? And when does that transition, when
Yeah,
is that transition supposed to happen?
well, I think the moment you come out of beta, right, it's ready for prime time. You figured out a repeatable number one deployment model, and what's the sales cycle look like? You've sort of that's always going to transition, by the way. That sales cycle, how do you figure out it's going to sell?
Okay. What does that mean? The sales cycle for our
Yeah.
students are technical in nature, right? But they might not be salespeople. What does sales cycle mean?
So, like, how are you developing your customers find you, first of all, right? And we call that developing a lead.
Okay.
Are they coming in through the sales guy's Rolodex? Do we have an outbound sales, so like what we call inside sales a lot? That someone calls out and cold calls a lot, and marketing, right? Sometimes people come in through marketing.
Yep. So that for some of our students, they might have heard it from other podcasts or other resources we provide. This is lead generation.
And you have to figure out, what's your way. And I tell everyone this. So that's what we call our pipeline, your leads, right? And there's an old adage. My favorite adage is pipeline's lifeline. You can't outsell a bad pipeline,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to figure out that's very quickly how you're going to get your leads, whether it's through the channels, someone that resells your product. And there's pros and cons of that too, right? What's your strategy here?
Yep.
But, you need to take a multi-pronged approach, in my opinion.
Yep. So then let's walk through the full sales cycle then. We said lead gen and then
And then from lead gen, it's first meeting typically. You have your inside sales, they follow up with, all these leads coming in. You get your first call. This is where a lot of sales teams fail. They don't know the founder story.
So then
Why
going
are you
when you
here?
talk about founder led sales succeeds in this first call because they do know the founder story.
I know that's the first question I ask every founder. Why did you start this company? Why are we here? And that's the most important thing when I interview around these startups too. If I don't believe in your founder story, we got an issue.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
So if I can't tell the same story why we were founded, right? Yeah, and I tell people this is so important because as a startup, you don't have every feature. People have to believe in your vision, and that's what I'm selling. They're willing to accept a product that's not perfect, doesn't fit all their needs, but they love the core idea. And people love giving you feedback more than you realize. And you have to take that feedback. You can't be defensive. I know sometimes people like, hey, I developed this product, it's my baby.
Yeah.
But listen to feedback. That is the most value. I tell everyone this is the most important thing, to listen, to hear something that you don't want to hear. That is, and execute upon that, right? Some people just shut down, but I think just keeping an open mind is important. A lot of these startups, some of them, I'll be honest, like, Nimble, what we're selling wasn't anything different, but
Mm.
it was the ability to story tell. And we told a better story to our customers.
Yep. I see. Okay, so then going back to that sales cycle. So there's lead generation through several different mechanisms. Some of it can be marketing, some could be outbound, some of it can
Yeah.
be through
The
sales
first call. Yep.
partnership and resellers. So that's lead generation. Then you get your first call, your first meeting, and then what?
And it's like, number one, you have to follow. I mean, it's your first call. You did your job if for example, the customer wants the next meeting as a follow up.
Okay.
And
And
this is where
what usually happens, what's the difference between a first call, or what's the scope of the conversation between first call versus a second call?
second call is like, let's say for example, the customer's like, hopefully you can either do a second call, meaning, hey, they want to follow up, they want more clarification,
Mhm.
right? Or let's say for example, they want to try your product out,
Ah, okay. A demo.
demo,
Okay.
or they want to try it out. You hear them referred to as POV, proof of value, or proof of concepts, right? And this is where the SE's job is to make the product appear easy.
And what is an SE?
A sales engineer. So we typically handle, it's a hybrid between sales and engineering. You look at sales guys, right? It's one end of the spectrum, and then you have the engineer, right? It's another end of the spectrum. Sales engineer is somewhere in between that, right? They're able to be the glue between technical and the
Mhm.
sales process.
I see. I see. So then why don't you staff an entire team with SEs instead of going with pure salespeople?
To be honest, that's a great question, right? And I have done both roles, and I think the problem is that in a complex sales cycle, you're always going to have someone that you're selling to that's technical. They don't trust the salesperson, so you have to separate those roles out. And
Okay.
so and it's good you separate them out too, because there are times when, like, the the you know uh, the person signing the check, right? They don't want to deal with the technical person.
Yep. Yep. Understood. Understood. So it's almost like like a strategic positioning that you have two different people that you can talk to, and each person has their own kind of like role to
Strengths,
play,
weaknesses.
strengths and
Yeah,
weaknesses. Okay. So
I
then
don't
let's
want sales to be dangerous.
yeah, yeah, that's true. So then let's go back through the sales cycle. So you have your lead generation, then you have your initial call, then you have potential. Let's say in the ideal scenario, you have a potential first call, then you have a second call where they want to either try your product, they want to demo your product, they want to kind of like play with your product enough to see if there's value in it, and then what?
Yeah, and so, and this is your yeah. So so you test a product, right? And you ask them, once you test my product, what are you hoping to get out of it? You have to understand and sometimes there could be a disconnect. What you presented, and you have to be very clear on that, right? So to test your product, hopefully they like it, right? And then from there, you start walking them through the purchasing process.
I see. Okay.
And this is very important. I'm glad you asked this, right? Because your first sales, you may not even get it to the second call. You may not even get to the POV, and you have to analyze at each one of those steps why you're not getting to the next step.
And could it and that has might or might not have anything to do with the product itself. It might have to be the sales process, or it could be about the sales process and the product itself.
Yeah, you can analyze, like, and the most important feedback you get at the end is, why didn't you buy my product?
Ah, okay. So
That is
this
the most valuable.
in kind of sales jargon terminology in the startup world, this is called funnel conversion. So each step of this, if we think about each of the steps on the sales cycle as a funnel, where the top of your funnel of sales, for example, your lead generation is you have the most number of potential candidates, then every step you kind of filter out. And so near the bottom, you have a small funnel at the bottom, but
Yeah,
these are the ones that are likely to pay for you.
that's great. And I mean, this is big company stuff, right? You wonder why top of funnel and how many percent gets to down there, right? And that's your revenue at the end.
Yep. And if your funnel is too narrow, then the question is, wait, what's happening? Why is my funnel narrowing? Why is my conversion not at a higher rate? But sometimes
Yeah,
we
is
yeah,
there no product fit in the market today, right?
yes.
Yeah,
Can
that's a great one.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to kind of turn the conversation a little bit here. I know that we're nearing at the end of the time that I've
Mhm.
asked you to hang out with us, but let's talk a little bit about that. You said that the product might not be differentiated enough, etc. So as you're going through and you're doing sales, and you've done pre-sales, you've done sales, you've done sales in a small startup, you've done sales at companies post IPO. How does a founder, like the students in our program, how does a founder leverage sales skills and the sales process to identify their competitive moat and their differentiation?
Yeah, that's great as well. First of all, it starts with the founder story. I can't emphasize how important that is. Why are you starting this company? That's the why, the big why. And I'm going to take a little tangent here because uh, if you're I see a lot of founders. Oh, we want to get an IPO out of this. That's the wrong strategy. First of all, I will call that straight out. I talk to a lot of founders, amazing ones, like in a league of their own, and I ask them, why are you doing this? Every single one, because I want to change the world.
Mm.
That's a consistent pattern. No one ever says I want to make money,
Mhm.
right? Right, and so that's the first of all most important thing, the founder story. All right, and then you have to be open with talking to a lot of people about your story and seeing how many people buy into that story. Hey, just your average Joe, go talk to someone off the street. Hey, we're in the same market. I'm thinking about starting this company. Can you convert? Can you convince them to buy my product? Right. We always talk about the CEO being your greatest seller. You
Mm.
better be.
Yeah. On that, I know that sometimes new entrepreneurs, they starting their first company says, "Oh, I don't want to say too much about what I'm doing because somebody else will steal my idea." What are your thoughts on
Go ahead. I got it. That means that my product's not differentiated enough.
it?
It's
Okay.
about execution too. I've seen a lot of people with great ideas, but it's about execution.
So if you talk about your story and it's sufficient enough for somebody else to steal your idea and out execute you, then you probably don't have an idea that's probably that differentiated with enough of a
You're
defensive.
100% right.
Okay. Okay. I
Right.
see.
I seen too many people develop products in an echo chamber.
Yeah. And what you said about there about the echo chamber, it's so important because you have gone in before the product was developed and you've gone out and you've talked about it and no one stole the idea enough that you weren't able to build a product to sell into that market.
Sorry, repeat that.
You set up developing in an echo chamber, and it goes back to that story you mentioned with the third company that you joined. You were able to go out before the product was built, talk about the idea, talk about the concept, and nobody stole the idea.
They didn't have the engineering team to develop it, right? As a startup, your objective, you have the first to market advantage, right? And if you can form a new market, which we did at Data Domain and VMware and Nimble, then everyone else is playing catch up. You eventually get to the stage with hyper growth where you are so ahead that people can't get ahead of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Wait, I know that we're past the time that I have to ask of you now. You have been on the side of sales and you've been evaluating founders because you said the founder story is probably one of the most important things that you can leverage as part of your sales asset. In our team, we talked a little bit about founder-led sales, and you said that at the early stages of your company, the founders should be doing some founder-led sales because they tell the story really well. But when they're ready to go hire their first sales hire, what do they need to do to make sure that they are picking the right first sales hire?
That's a great question. I've seen too many startups. Number one, they hire someone really junior.
Mm.
Right. I think having some experience is good.
Okay, what does junior mean?
Someone straight out of college because they don't want to pay someone. I know budget can be an issue, right? They don't want to pay someone a lot of money. Second of all, the second thing I look for when you hire the first sales team is someone that's willing to experiment. Experience is a double-edged sword, right? It makes you more efficient, but at the same time, you start doing things mechanically without thinking why you do certain things.
Because you have your habits and your process.
Yeah, and I've been in tech a long time. You constantly have to reinvent yourself.
Mm.
I question every time I join a new startup. I question, why did I do this in the first place, right? And you need someone that's willing to experiment to figure out, whatever it takes to get the sales done. Like we weren't selling for day domain. The first year was actually pretty brutal, and we had to ask ourselves what were we doing, and we had to be willing to experiment. And it turned out it was just customers just didn't understand the concept of this new idea that we had.
Mhm.
It was called dedupe at the time.
Yeah. So from your end, as you're giving us this perspective from the first sales hire side of it. So you said the founder can, um, sorry, from the founder side of it, when you say, find somebody who has some experience but is willing to experiment and be somewhat creative.
Yeah.
From the first hire's perspective, what can a founder do to attract experienced salespeople?
This is a Frank Slootman thing that I loved about Frank. He was willing to pay top dollars. Everyone who doesn't want to make a lot of money, right? And I've seen a lot of startups do this too. They started following the Frank Slootman model. They paid a lot for the first sales rep, and the first sales, and the first sales rep does really well, blows out his number, right? And then the subsequent hires, they go a little cheaper, right? Because we use the first sales guy to hire subsequent people, right? What Frank would do differently was his subsequent hires, he'll pay just as much, and he
Mm,
would continue that cycle. But
okay.
Frank expected the top talent. He paid you top dollars. He expected you top talent,
Okay.
and Frank would hold you accountable.
What does that mean?
Frank was, to be honest, very harsh, very quick to fire. Don't be
Ah,
afraid to do that. He held you accountable.
how quick?
We've seen anywhere from 6 months to a year.
Okay. And then that's, that 6 month number is such a magical number because we hear that all the time. And, we hear that 6 month ramp up of productivity for new hires. So 6 months to a year. Okay. And when you talk about sales compensation, just quickly about this, you don't have to disclose your own compensation numbers, but the sales compensation, how much of it is base salary versus how much of it's performance incentives and performance bonus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically sales reps are 50-50,
Mm,
right? So 50% base, 50% commission. A sales engineer is typically 70-30. I've been on the more aggressive side. I'm 60% base
okay.
and 40%, right? So I I expect to blow it out.
I see. For a sales engineer, on the sales
Sales
engineer.
engineer, yeah.
I see. I see. We are at the end of the time that we booked of you, and I'm so
Yeah.
sorry for running over. Let me ask you
Took
one
plenty of time, by the way.
let me ask you one last question. For our students, they're going out and they're doing any company that can be, some of them will do B2C types of companies, some will do B2B, and some will do enterprise. And you said something earlier. You said, that in some of the companies you are transitioning from, B2B sales to enterprise sales. Can you just help us understand what does enterprise sales in definition? What is the definition of enterprise sales?
Enterprise sales tend to be more, can be larger deals, right? But I'll take a step back too, because a lot of people want to get into enterprise sales. They start a startup, they sell a product, and oh, we want to get to enterprise sales. I think number one, a lot of startups do too early.
Okay.
That's always been, because who doesn't want sales? I want larger deals. Who doesn't want larger deals? Number one, if you go in too early, it takes a lot of resources to go in enterprise, first of all. If you go in too early and you fail in enterprise, it's very hard to get back.
But what does enterprise sales mean, and why would it be so much of an investment?
Yeah, enterprise sales are typically larger deals. So the sales cycle we talked about, from pipeline generation to the PO, typically takes a lot longer.
Mhm. And it's selling into bigger organizations, usually with more seats that are used in more than one division and department.
Exactly. And the thing is, the sales tends to be more business focused.
Okay. So value focus and less technical user.
Exactly. Whenever
Okay.
you're starting a startup, right, you're getting the nerdy guy in the beginning, right? And then in a few years, you're selling to the business guy. What's the
Yeah,
business value he's getting out of this, right?
I see. So because one, those contracts tend to be bigger because the deployment is bigger, there's a lot more users involved, you're talking to more of
The
the
guy
business.
signing the check is,
Yes. Yes.
right,
Yep.
holding the purse, right? He's not technical typically.
And they want like proof of value and customer ROI data. Okay.
Right. So that's more of an enterprise type sale. And that's, you have to go through that transition. Not a lot of successful sales teams can do that. So that's why they typically, at that phase, they hire different reps to get into the enterprise.
Oh, I see. Interesting. So you hire for SMB if you're going to do SMB, and when you're ready, and if you are ready or ever transitioning into it, make sure you hire an enterprise dedicated salesperson.
Yeah. It's a very
Let me
different sales cycle.
let me ask you this other question. I know the last question was what I said was the last
Uh,
question, but let me ask you this other question. On what about, you said something earlier about lead generation, and it could be through your resellers or your partnerships. What are channel partnerships, and what does a partnerships lead do?
so the channel partners are typically, so basically they're sales organizations, but they represent maybe 20 different vendors,
Okay.
right? Not just your product, for example. They could represent your competitor too.
I see. Okay.
And so I always believed in the channel philosophy. It does make sales process more complicated because now you have no middleman, right? Because typically they may hold a relationship in an account you want to get into.
So it's sort of like if you're selling to somebody who is not so much a marketplace, but they sell many different products to the similar types of customers.
Yep.
And so if you go through a channel partnership instead of doing what's called direct sales, then they own the customer relationship. They know the customers. You don't know the
Yeah, but they amplify your sales force.
Okay. So
And
I was
that's the
going to ask you that. Okay.
right. To get those number of leads that you can't hire every sales rep and his Rolodex,
Yep. Yep.
right? And so goes back to being a sales rep. You have to learn how to work with the channel partners.
Yes, I see. Do you need to hire a sales rep to manage the channel partnerships or build the channel partnerships? Or who do you hire at an organization to build out the channel partnership?
Typically, as the company gets large enough, you hire a dedicated channel person.
Okay, like a VP of partnerships or something like that. You see those
Yeah,
types?
well, partnerships. I'll distinguish. There's partnerships and there's channel sales.
Okay,
There's alliances. Let's say, for example, your product works. There's a lot of synergy between. They're not your competitors, right? There's a lot of synergy with another product A, B, and Z. So we bundle a solution together, right? That's that. Those are typically alliances.
I see. Well, help us and then break up the. You said there's channels, alliances, and partnerships. What's the distinct definition between channels, alliances, and partnerships?
Channel alliance. Yeah, alliances are people that have a lot of synergy, right? We're friends. We can work together.
Complementary products.
Yeah, complementary products. The channel is someone that you resell your product, right? And they take a small cut.
Yep. And then what's partnerships then?
That's a good question, actually.
Partnerships can, I asked this question and I think, some different organizations define it differently. Sometimes partnerships are ones that are used for branding. Sometimes partnerships are vendors that also have their own sales team that you could sometimes co-sale with that are somewhat similar to alliances. So you typically, when the company is big enough, you typically hire somebody and that isn't just a VP of alliances. It'll be a VP of partnerships and alliances or VP of channels and partnerships or something along those lines.
Thanks for answering that.
Yeah, yeah. Hui, one last question for you. You have obviously been very, very successful on the sales side at some very difficult tech companies to work with, and they've been very successful in turn because of your contribution to the company. As our students are going out and they're building their own startup in the next 6 to 9 months, do you have any parting words of advice for them as they're thinking about sales?
Yeah, I think the customer feedback is the most important thing, and making sure you take that back. And like we talk about a lot about the sales, cycle, right? The most important feedback. It's sure we celebrate the wins. The wins feel good. That's why we do this. But the most important feedback is why they didn't buy.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you where a lot of startups fail. I did betas for a lot of startups. Everything we did not fix in beta, the problems got worse as we grew the company.
Mm.
Every company you look back, hindsight's 2020, right? But that feedback you got in beta is the reason your company's going to fail 3 years later.
Ah, but what if you over engineer at the beta? Have you ever seen a company over engineer, over fix at the beta?
Then you miss the market.
Ah, so it's such a delicate dance. Okay, students. So what we just fundamentally said is make sure you're talking to your customer, but you have to strike a really fine balance between resolving some of the critical issues that the customers have around customer experience and proof of value.
I think it's about making sure you have a plan to fix it. I want
Okay.
to clarify that. And you follow through whether a year after beta or something like that.
I see. I see. Thank you so much for that word of advice. Obviously there are very few people who even ever make it to an M&A or a mergers and acquisition or an exit via an acquisition. And very, very few people who make it to an IPO. In your case, you've made it through an M&A and two IPOs within your very short time in sales. And you said 20-25 years. 20-25 years is a very short amount of years relative to the span of the human life. Thank you so much. We so deeply appreciate the expertise that you have. You have a storied career, and the students are so lucky to learn it from.
Thank you for your time as well. Always willing to talk to anyone.
Thank you, Lee. Students, that's another episode of the AI Sana podcast. Make sure you tune in for the next episode. Have a good night. Bye bye.